The wooden gavel cracked through the air like a rifle shot. Kash Patel didn't bother with introductions. This isn't a stage, it's a federal inquiry. Let's not pretend it's anything else. He flipped through his file and raised his gaze. But before we begin, if OCG, the man your administration classified as non-returnable, is present today, I'd like him to stand. The room froze. Not just quiet, vacuum still. Then, in the third row, a figure slowly rose. Slender, tense, not proud, not defiant. Just there. Undeniable. Gasps echoed across the room like distant thunder. A few DOJ aides scrambled, papers slipping from their hands. A reporter dropped her pen. President Denzel Washington leaned forward. No whisper, no pause. His voice cut the silence. What the hell is this? That man was deported. Case closed. Kash Patel didn't blink. Your legal team told this inquiry under oath that his return was impossible. And yet, here he is. Care to clarify, Mr. President? Denzel gave a half laugh, the kind meant to drown tension. Clarify? This is a show. You dragged some guy from Tijuana, shaved him, dressed him in tragedy, and called it justice. Bravo. Kash raised an eyebrow. The court has verified his identity through 3 separate channels, including ICE records, with your signature. Denzel crossed his arms and smirked, not amused but armored. You know how many things have my signature? 3,000 pens a week. I don't read every file slid across my desk by career staffers. That's why I have lawyers. Kash Patel didn't respond to the deflection. Instead, he looked at the man still standing. Mr. OCG, you may sit. OCG sat, slowly, quietly. Denzel turned to his counsel, gestured theatrically. You seeing this? They rehearsed it. Feels like a Hallmark movie spliced with an immigration sob story. Patel's voice came low and firm. You will direct your responses to this chamber, Mr. President. Denzel narrowed his eyes. I built half the benches in this room. Some of you owe me your seats. A rustle moved through the back of the gallery. Kash didn't raise his voice. And yet here you are, under subpoena, being asked to explain your administration's contradictions regarding deportations. Denzel rose. You want to know why we deported him? Because we were cleaning house. We inherited a border that looked like Walmart on Black Friday. Chaos, no security. We restored order. Kash let him speak, then leaned forward. No one is disputing the law exists, Mr. President. What's on trial is process. You said it was logistically and legally impossible to bring someone back. And yet, he's here. Denzel's lips curved into a slight smirk. One man walks in and suddenly the whole system's broken? Please. Kash Patel opened a folder. You didn't just deport him. You deported him in direct violation of a federal restraining order. He had an open asylum case and a judicial directive not to be removed. Denzel rolled his eyes. Let me guess. He told the court his aunt was kidnapped by aliens. Judges hand out stays like candy. He got a piece of paper and thought that made him a citizen. Kash didn't flinch. Paper is how the Constitution speaks, Mr. President. Denzel leaned in. You want to talk Constitution? Let's talk about how it gives the president the executive power to protect the nation. That's what I did. Kash didn't move. You didn't protect him. You sent him back to a place where he was raped. After we told you explicitly not to. A long beat. Denzel's jaw tightened, but the charisma didn't crack. So now I'm a villain because one man claims trauma? Every undocumented story gets a therapist now? Kash's response came cold and final. This isn't about how he felt, it's about what you said, under oath, and whether it was true. You're here today, Mr. President, because your administration told this inquiry 6 separate times that bringing this man back was beyond your legal and logistical power. And yet, without a congressional act, without a UN mandate, without divine intervention, you did it. Denzel Washington opened his hands as if in surrender. So what? You got your man back. You want a trophy? A statue? Maybe name a bridge after him? Kash didn't blink. This isn't about glory. It's about correcting the record. You said it couldn't be done. It was done. That makes your previous sworn testimony questionable. Denzel didn't reply. Kash closed the file in front of him, deliberately. This inquiry will determine whether those statements were knowingly false. We'll review the documents, examine internal memos, and we'll hear from everyone involved. Denzel slumped back in his chair. The smirk was gone. You're all just performing. You want drama? The real fiction writers are your staff. Maybe Netflix will greenlight this circus. Kash Patel didn't smile. This isn't Netflix, Mr. President. This is federal review, and it's very real. The gallery fell silent again. Then Kash turned toward the witness stand. Mr. OCG, you may address the inquiry. OCG stood. No suit, no polished shoes, just a pale blue shirt, loose threads, and a voice that refused to tremble. I came here once before, he began, not to take anything, but because I believed this country followed its own rules. I asked for protection. I got no trial, no lawyer, just a bus, and Mexico. He paused. And in Mexico, I didn't find safety. I found the same men who took me before. They beat me again. Then, they raped me. The silence didn't settle. It collapsed, like a wall shattered from within. Denzel exhaled hard, eyes flicking. You hear that? This is where we are now, running foreign policy on sob stories. What's next? Bedtime hearings. OCG didn't react. He continued, quiet and steady. I begged to come back. I wrote letters, filed papers. One day, a lawyer I'd never even met told me a judge had ruled I never should have been deported. And now I'm here, not because it was easy, but because finally someone listened. Kash nodded. Thank you, Mr. OCG. He turned to the respondent. Mr. President, your legal team repeatedly argued that returning this man was impossible. Yet here he stands. Denzel leaned back, arms crossed behind his head. First off, nobody brought me the rape file. You think I read every tragic essay that floats into the inbox? I manage thousands of cases. I delegate. But Kash Patel had already leaned forward. Mr. President, you signed the deportation order. Your initials are on the final authorization to remove Mr. OCG and send him specifically to Mexico. Denzel didn't flinch. That proves nothing. Staffers bring me stacks of documents. I trust my team. Maybe they messed up. Kash raised a page. This is the restraining order from Judge Ellis of Massachusetts. It clearly forbade deportation to Mexico. The Department of Justice received it. A copy was sent to the White House. It was acknowledged by your chief of staff. Denzel offered a dry smirk. So what you're saying is, we were too efficient? Too many papers? Overwhelmed by our own excellence? Kash didn't laugh. He pointed to a handwritten note on the bottom margin. Right here, you wrote, "Send anyway, we can't baby everyone." That's your handwriting, correct? Denzel shrugged. Sounds like me. The room went still. No one breathed. Kash Patel didn't raise his voice. You understood the court's order, and you chose to disregard it. That's not delegation. That's defiance, Denzel shot back, tone firm, still proud. That's leadership. When a country's on the edge, you don't file paperwork. You act. Denzel Washington leaned forward, voice heavy with righteous fire. I didn't break the law. I bent it in the direction this country needed. Kash Patel responded sharply, not missing a beat. You didn't bend it, Mr. President. You snapped it, and you wrapped the broken pieces around a man who had a lawful claim to stay. Denzel raised his hands, frustration bubbling beneath his calm. We're talking about one guy. Meanwhile, I stopped thousands from pouring into this country. Thousands. Kash held up another document. This isn't about numbers. This is about truth. You told this inquiry 6 separate times that returning someone like OCG was impossible. That exact word, impossible. And yet, he gestured to the witness stand. Here he is, not in theory, not on paper, in flesh. Denzel narrowed his eyes. You people thrive on spectacle. You love the drama. This whole thing, it's all theater. Kash didn't flinch. This isn't theater, Mr. President. It's evidence. For a moment, even Denzel had no comeback. Then he pivoted. Quick. Practiced. So now I'm the bad guy because I moved fast? Because I tried to protect the people outside this building? Look around. This place isn't exactly overflowing with gratitude. Kash replied, calm but firm. It doesn't need to overflow. It needs to function. The Constitution doesn't guarantee comfort. It guarantees process. Denzel clapped once, slow and sarcastic. Poetic. You should write speeches for the ones I beat in 2016. Kash Patel stayed steady. This hearing isn't about poetry. It's about whether the Department of Justice, under your direct authority, misled the federal judiciary, knowingly and repeatedly. Denzel leaned in with a grin, but it didn't reach his eyes. Make me the villain if you want, but I kept our borders strong. I made decisions weak men wouldn't dare make, and I'd do it again. Then came a voice, soft but sharp as wire. OCG, still seated, spoke. Then maybe next time, send someone who's already dead. The air thickened, dense, suffocating, like thunderclouds over a battlefield. Kash Patel adjusted his posture. Chairwoman Shinnis leaned forward, her gaze fixed on Denzel. His smirk twitched, just slightly, under the growing weight of fact. Then, from the side bench, a new voice entered the arena. Your Honors, may I? A woman stood. The clerk read aloud, Elelina Merles, former counsel, DOJ Immigration Litigation Unit. Kash raised an eyebrow. You're the one who resigned last fall, correct? She nodded. I left when I realized my signature was being used to clean up political messes. She stepped forward and placed a black folder on the evidence table. Today I'm here with something no signature can bury. The chamber dimmed slightly as the screen behind her lit up. A scanned document appeared in bold at the top. Top secret. Eyes only executive instruction. Memo 11G. Objective. Re-entry authorization under discretionary immigration. Waiver authorized by Denzel J. Washington. Chairwoman Shinnis laced her fingers. Mr. President, you told this inquiry that bringing someone back after deportation was not only impossible but inadvisable. Her eyes narrowed, and yet, here you are, not only advising it, but funding it. Denzel didn't flinch, but behind him his legal team shifted, like passengers realizing the pilot had never read the flight manual. He raised his voice slightly. I sign off on hundreds of memos a week. You think I memorize every line item and every authorization? That one document means nothing. Kash didn't look away. It means everything. He turned to the clerk. Please read the line item. The clerk cleared her throat. June 24th, charter jet from Tijuana to Dallas International. Cost $238,000. Client, OCG. Purpose, silent return. Executive sign-off. DJW. Period. Denzel chuckled. Too loud, too sudden. You're getting dramatic over a technicality. Denzel Washington raised his voice, not angry but forceful. I brought him back, didn't I? You should be thanking me. Chairwoman Shinnis stood cold and firm. You didn't bring him back out of concern. You brought him back to avoid litigation. You signed off only because if he had died in Mexico, as he nearly did, your administration would have been buried in civil lawsuits. Denzel snapped back. You think presidents don't make hard calls? I deported thousands. That's strength. That's border control. That's America first. Kash Patel's voice dropped, calm but deadly. That wasn't strength, Mr. President. That was cowardice, disguised under jet fuel and invoices. You knew the deportation was illegal. You knew the risks, you just didn't care, until the trail led back to you. Denzel lifted his hands like a preacher mid-sermon. My people love me because I get things done. I cut red tape. You call it breaking rules, I call it fixing problems. A long pause. Then Shinnis replied, voice precise as a scalpel. This wasn't cutting red tape. It was shredding due process. And no one, not even a president, has the right to turn his initials into a license for impunity. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Denzel glanced at his legal team, his lips parted, waiting for a lifeline. None came. In the back of the chamber, OCG remained still, but undeniably present, living proof that even the most powerful signature leaves a trail. Then the lights dimmed, the projector flickered on. Kash Patel gave a silent nod. The screen showed a rusted gate, creaking open. Beyond it, Facility 42, wrapped in razor wire. Rows of steel corridors appeared, concrete cells stacked like shipping containers. Inside, bodies huddled, no windows, no beds, only coughing, groaning, and something worse, surrender. A title flashed. Facility 42, El Salvador Venezuelan detainees, extracted 2020 program. The courtroom froze, phones were lowered. Defense attorney sat stiffly, jaws locked. Kash Patel addressed the gallery. These are the 140, deported, detained, disappeared. A human rights attorney stepped forward beside the screen, her voice flat but steel-forged. This was a joint transfer between ICE, Salvadoran security forces, and U.S. contractors, funded through emergency federal security grants. Shinnis interjected, cold as frost. Let's use the correct term, counselor. Entombed. Kash nodded grimly. The Inter-American Commission on Human Rights called this a structural atrocity. Denzel shifted uncomfortably, leaning into the mic. That's exaggerated. I never told anyone to put people in cages. I didn't sign off on that. Kash Patel remained composed. You didn't need to. You authorized the routes. You approved the third-party contractors. You signed the flight manifests. You built the funnel. The system did the rest. Denzel's voice rose, defensive. I signed hundreds of documents a week. Now you want to blame me for a detention site in another country? Shinnis leaned forward, steady and merciless. You don't need to swing the hammer to raise the gallows. A signature is enough. Denzel tapped his knuckles on the table. You're making this personal. This was policy, national security. I protected Americans. The human rights attorney resumed. According to verified NGO reports, detainees were denied light, water, and medical care. The youngest was 16. The oldest, 74. 5 died. 37 suffered severe psychological trauma. She held up a faded page, the ink warped, but legible. A name signed beneath a trembling line. Kash Patel read aloud, I want to believe I was more than paperwork, but I am tired of being proof. Please bury me. Please bury me where no one will process me again. The silence that followed was not quiet. It was heavy. Then from the back of the gallery, a woman slowly stood. Her silver hair was wrapped in a modest scarf. Her eyes didn't shake. Her voice didn't crack. That's my son's handwriting. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. She raised a photograph. A young man with wide shoulders and a crooked smile stared back from the glossy image. They called it deportation, she said, but they sent him to a coffin without nails. Denzel Washington folded his arms. If there were problems, someone should have flagged it. I handled the big picture. Kash Patel's voice dropped, stripped of patience. They did. DHS flagged it. ICE flagged it. Your chief of staff was briefed twice. The DHS Inspector General requested a suspension. Your office issued clearance, twice. Chairwoman Shinnis cut in. This wasn't a broken system, Mr. President. It operated exactly as designed. You didn't press a button. You built the machine. A junior lawyer from Denzel's legal team leaned in to whisper something, urgently. He ignored it. You're twisting intent, Denzel barked. If a few cases went sideways, that doesn't invalidate the mission. You're cherry-picking tragedy. The human rights attorney lifted a second photo. This one showed a dim red cell. A boy sat in the corner, knees pulled to chest, face lost in shadow. The caption, Carlos E.G., age 20, last known record, March 2021. The silver-haired woman's voice returned, not trembling, but crystalline. His name was Carlos. He sent that letter 2 weeks before. The guard said he just stopped responding. He didn't hang himself, he gave up breathing. Denzel turned away. He didn't speak. The attorney pressed on. We interviewed 73 survivors. They weren't deported. They were disappeared. Kash Patel straightened. Let's be plain. This wasn't just unlawful. It was engineered cruelty. The screen cut to black. Chairwoman Shinnis picked up the letter and entered it into the official record. You didn't kill anyone, Mr. President, but you designed a system that ensured some never made it home. Then came something unexpected. A murmur, not from the gallery but from the press pool. A reporter typed a headline aloud as it went live on the screen. He didn't sign a death warrant. He just made one inevitable. Denzel stared forward, mouth tight, arms crossed. His lawyers didn't whisper anymore. They just watched. Kash Patel looked up once more. A prison without graves doesn't erase the dead. It only hides them. And in that moment, even the ceiling lights seemed too harsh. Still, no gavel struck, no call to rise, just silence. The kind that doesn't settle, it clings. Then Kash leaned forward, his voice steady, calm, and final. This court does not deliver criminal sentencing today, Mr. President, but it does deliver something far more lasting: clarity. The law wasn't destroyed, it was smothered, and today we tear the cloth back. Denzel shifted in his seat, his eyes flicked, his lawyers stayed still. They knew what was coming. Kash Patel continued, "You may not wear chains, Mr. President, but the truth you refuse to face now has its own momentum. And it begins with this." He lifted a single sheet of paper, and the screen lit up behind him, the image of an executive order. Dated February 19th, 20. Silent return directive signed, Denzel J. Washington. Denzel's voice rose, a final grasp at control. I acted for America. No decision was made lightly. I had to secure the borders, not entertain asylum fairy tales. But Shinnis cut in, quiet, surgical. You used the Constitution as duct tape, Mr. President. You didn't seal cracks, you suffocated lives. Chairwoman Shinnis didn't raise her voice. Mr. President, you didn't seal the cracks, you suffocated levees. A gasp rippled through the gallery. Even the stenographer's fingers paused mid-stroke. Shinnis turned back to the screen. Now it displayed a long list of names, dozens, hundreds, 140 Venezuelans rerouted, not through law, not through trial, but through executive override. But no judge, no hearing, just flight manifests filed in silence, labeled national security. Denzel Washington stood up, voice cold and clipped. I want to leave. This circus is beneath me. But Kash Patel's voice was colder than steel. You'll remain until the ruling is read. This court does not adjourn for discomfort. Denzel sat down, shoulders tight, hands clenched. Yet still he smirked, as if daring the walls to collapse before he did. Then the lights dimmed again. A spotlight moved toward the witness stand. But it wasn't a lawyer, it wasn't a prosecutor. It was a mother. Her name, Reina Sado. Her voice trembled, but her spine did not. She unfolded a worn letter, its corners curled, softened by nights gripped too tightly. My son was 19, he wasn't a criminal, he was deported. No trial, no call, and 2 weeks later, I received this letter. She read from it, softly but with force. Mama, this cage has no light, no air. I don't think I will leave here alive. She looked up, and he didn't. Denzel looked away, his jaw locked, his chest rose slowly. Reina held up a photograph, a half smile, half shadow. He died in a cell with 37 others, no names, just numbers. That was your policy, a file number instead of a future. The silence returned, but now it rang louder than applause. Chairwoman Shinnis stepped forward, gaze never leaving Denzel. You didn't kill him, but you built the system that did. Denzel opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came. Kash Patel continued, calm and devastating. We're not here to punish a man. We're here to shatter a myth. That power purifies, that signatures are bloodless. He turned toward the gallery. This ruling doesn't carry a prison term. It carries something older than politics. Consequence, Denzel's voice returned. Softer now, hollow. This will blow over, they always do. Shinnis looked at him one last time. You said they couldn't be brought back. But we did, and now you carry that truth forever. Outside, a murmur began. The courtroom doors opened. OCG stepped out first, still holding the original deportation order, once marked with finality. Now, across the top, a bold red stamp read, "Void. Constitution reclaimed." Cameras clicked. Phones rose. Then, a teenager stepped forward. He approached the marble wall outside the courthouse. In his hand, a piece of white chalk. And on the wall, he wrote, "Some dams break with water, some with truth." And in that moment, no verdict was needed. The flood had already begun. As the crowd stood silently, eyes fixed on the chalked words, it became clear. This was never just about deportation. It was about what a country allows itself to forget. And who pays the price for that amnesia? It was about the illusion that legality equals morality, that paperwork outweighs pain, that a signature can build a wall. But truth always finds a way to crack it open. In that final moment, the courtroom became something more than a place of judgment. It became a mirror held not only to Denzel Washington, but to every citizen who stayed quiet when the dam cracked, who thought the flood wouldn't reach them. Because justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's just a name on a list, finally being read aloud, and sometimes that's enough to start a flood.